It happened in less than 10 seconds. One moment I was sitting in my car keys, still warm in my handbrain, completely fried after a long day on the bench, and the next moment there was a man with mirrored sunglasses banging on my window telling me to step out of the vehicle like I'd done something wrong. I remember thinking, this can't be for me. And then realizing, yeah, it is. That happened. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times since, not because I enjoy it, but because it taught me something I never really understood before, not in my bones anyway. I'd spent my entire career ruling on other people's rights, analyzing violations, weighing facts, writing opinions about what should and shouldn't happen in a fair system. But nothing prepares you for the moment. You're the one sitting there being judged in real time, not by evidence or law, but by how you look. You know what I mean? That day started like any other exhausting court day. 9 straight hours of hearings, arguments, motions that went nowhere, lawyers trying to sound confident while reading from notes they barely understood. The kind of day that leaves your shoulders tight and your patience thin. By the time I walked down into the courthouse parking garage, I wasn't thinking about justice or principles. I was thinking about my couch, maybe dinner. Silence. My robe was hanging in the back seat. My briefcase was next to me, stuffed with files I'd probably reread later, even though I promised myself I wouldn't. I slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, exhaled, and that's when the shadows moved. 3 of them. Fast, coordinated. One stepped directly in front of my car, one came up to my window, the third angled himself behind me so there was nowhere to go. Tactical vests, radios, patches, immigration enforcement. Federal. The man at my window knocked hard, not politely, not like someone with a question, but like someone who'd already decided how this was going to end. When I cracked the window a few inches, he leaned in and said, "Step out of the vehicle. No greeting, no explanation, just a command." I asked him why. Calmly. Professionally, the way I've asked hundreds of officers questions from the bench. He didn't answer. He said identification, proof of citizenship. And something about that phrase hit me wrong immediately. Proof you belong here, not suspicion of a crime, not a description, not a report, just prove it. Now, I want to be clear about something because people love to simplify moments like this. Yes, I had my federal judge ID in my purse. Yes, I could have ended the entire thing by flashing it. And no, my decision not to wasn't about ego or making a point for fun. I was tired, and I understood something that day that a lot of people don't realize until they're cornered. Rights only matter when you're willing to stand on them, especially when the other side doesn't expect you to. If I had shown that badge immediately, this would have been another story they told themselves about a mistake that didn't really count. And I couldn't let that happen, not after everything I'd seen. So I asked him what reasonable suspicion he had. He said there were reports of suspicious activity, and I matched the description. I asked what description. He hesitated, just long enough, then said a description. That's when I knew. This wasn't about anything I did. This was about who they decided I was. The tone shifted fast after that. He told me I was being uncooperative, that refusing to provide documentation was suspicious in itself. He ordered me out of the vehicle again, louder this time, like volume could fill the holes in his logic. I kept my hands on the steering wheel. I told him I was invoking my Fourth Amendment rights. I told him this stop was unlawful. I told him I was a federal judge. He smiled at me like I just told a joke. "Sure you are," he said. And that was the moment something inside me went cold. The door opened before I could react. Someone grabbed my arm. I said clearly, "I am not resisting." I said it again when they pulled harder. They didn't listen. They never do when they've already decided the story in their head. "Hands behind your back," someone barked. Metal cuffs closed around my wrists, right there in the courthouse garage, the same garage I'd parked in for over 20 years. I remember the sound, the click. I remember thinking, wow, this is really happening. They searched my car without consent, without cause, without even pretending to justify it. My briefcase, my files, sealed documents, privileged material. Every item they touched was another violation stacking on top of the last. When they found my judicial credential, I expected relief. I expected that awkward silence when people realize they've gone too far. Instead, the lead agent squinted at it and said it could be fake. Fake. A federal judicial ID in a federal courthouse garage. I laughed once, sharp and bitter, and asked him if he planned to verify it with courthouse security about 300 feet away. He ignored me. They walked me past the security station in cuffs. The guard I'd nodded to every morning stared at me like his brain couldn't catch up with his eyes. He reached for his phone. An agent snapped at him to stay out of it. Federal matter. The guard froze. And I don't blame him, not entirely. Authority has a way of paralyzing people who know something's wrong but don't know how much it'll cost them to speak up. The drive to the field office took 18 minutes. I remember because I counted my breaths to stay calm. I wasn't scared. Fear needs uncertainty, and I had none. I knew exactly how this would end. The only question was how much damage they'd do before someone with sense stepped in. At the office, they processed me like anyone else. Photos, fingerprints, property bag. They took my watch, my earrings, my purse, then they put me in a holding cell. Bars, metal bench, the smell of disinfectant failing to cover years of desperation. Sitting there was the hardest part, not because I doubted myself, but because I finally understood something I'd only grasped intellectually before. How small the room feels when you have no control. How fast dignity disappears when procedure replaces humanity. And I kept thinking about the people who sit in rooms like that every day and don't get released 40 minutes later. People without credentials, without lawyers on speed dial, people who get labeled processed, forgotten. When the supervisor finally showed up and ran my badge number properly, her face changed in a way I'll never forget. Confusion, recognition, then absolute horror. Phone calls happened fast after that. Lawyers appeared. Apologies poured out like they could wash the whole thing away. They released me, handed back my things, and walked me out with that careful politeness people use when they know they've messed up badly. The director used words like regrettable and unfortunate. I said nothing. Silence felt heavier, more accurate. I went back to work the next day, sat on the bench, heard cases, pretended everything was normal. But something had shifted. Every time I saw someone in cuffs, every time an officer said, non-compliant, my jaw tightened. I realized apologies weren't enough. Internal reviews weren't enough. I'd ruled on too many cases where those words meant nothing. So I made a call to a civil rights attorney who didn't flinch when I told her what happened. She didn't gasp or swear. She asked for timestamps. That's how I knew she was the right one. We filed suit, clean, precise, every violation laid out. Fourth Amendment, due process, equal protection, false imprisonment. They tried to hide behind qualified immunity, the same doctrine I'd applied myself from the bench. But some things are so clearly wrong you don't get to pretend otherwise. The judge denied their motion to dismiss, writing plainly that no reasonable officer could believe this was lawful. Translation: you're on your own. Discovery cracked everything open. Body cam footage, training records, personnel files, patterns emerged fast. The lead agent had a history. Similar stops, similar excuses. Always vague. Always people of color. Little discipline. The system hadn't failed. It had functioned exactly as designed. In depositions, the agents unraveled. One admitted he'd never encountered a black woman who was a federal judge, so my credentials seemed implausible. He actually said that on the record. You could feel the case ending right there. The government offered a small settlement early. Training, money, no accountability. I said no, because training without consequences is just paperwork. As trial approached, they sent in bigger lawyers, serious ones. At mediation, my attorney laid it all out. Video, testimony, experts. The mediator didn't sugarcoat it. A jury would be furious. A verdict could be massive. 2 days later, a real offer came. Money, firings, policy changes, oversight, public accountability. I accepted with one condition. Part of the settlement would fund a legal clinic for people challenging unlawful detentions, people who never get believed. The government agreed. The story went public. Headlines flew. Agents lost their jobs. Hearings were scheduled. I testified in my robe on purpose, not for drama, but for truth. So no one could pretend they didn't know who they'd put in cuffs. Data came out showing patterns. Quota-like pressure. Emails telling agents not to waste time verifying in the field. Detain first, sorted out later. That single sentence explained everything. This wasn't about 3 bad actors. It was about a culture that rewarded speed over rights. Lawsuits followed. Citizens came forward. People who'd been detained for accents, for skin color, for existing in the wrong space. The costs piled up, millions. Some people still ask me if I should have just shown my ID that day and gone home. And I get why they ask. It's easier, safer, quieter. But here's the thing, rights that only work when you cooperate aren't rights. They're privileges, and privileges disappear the moment you don't fit someone else's idea of who belongs. I had the rare opportunity to force the system to look at itself, and I couldn't turn away. So now I'm asking you, Was I right to fight it the way I did, or do you think I made it worse by refusing in that moment? And be honest. Have you ever seen authority double down instead of admitting they were wrong? Drop your thoughts below. Tell your story if you've got one. Because these conversations